It was one of those stormy nights where the wind howled like a pack of wolves outside the little doll shop I worked at. I had grown used to the quiet rhythm of the shop by now. Dust settling on the shelves, the faint creak of the floorboards, the delicate click-clack of porcelain being shaped by Mr. Wilkes, the elderly doll maker. But tonight felt different. The air was thicker, heavier, like something was waiting, lurking just beyond the edges of the ordinary. The doll maker's workshop had been in this small town for as long as anyone could remember. Its narrow windows barely let in any light, and the dim glow from the candles Mr. Wilkes preferred cast long shadows across the many shelves crammed with lifelike porcelain dolls. Each one was meticulously crafted, their eyes so real that they seemed to follow you wherever you went. They were beautiful in an eerie, unsettling way. But to Mr. Wilkes, they were perfect, his masterpieces. I had been working here for a few months now, assisting him with the delicate tasks that required a steady hand. But lately, I'd noticed something off about Mr. Wilkes. Something even more unsettling than the dolls themselves. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, had grown distant, glazed over, as if he was looking at something that wasn't there. He had become obsessed with the dolls, particularly with the eyes. He would stare into them for hours, his lips moving as though speaking to them, muttering incomprehensible things. I had never asked him about it. After all, he was a master, and I was just his assistant. Then there was Mr. Gray. He first came in weeks ago, a peculiar, gaunt man with an unsettling smile that never seemed to reach his eyes. His visits had grown more frequent over time. He always bought one of the largest dolls, the ones Mr. Wilkes had spent the most time perfecting. And every time he would stand there for a long while, whispering something to the doll before purchasing it. Something about the way he spoke to them made my skin crawl. He didn't speak to the dolls like they were inanimate objects. He spoke to them like they were children, his voice soft, coaxing, as if he was trying to comfort them. It was on this particular night that things began to spiral out of control. The storm outside raged louder, the wind rattling the shutters of the shop. The sound of the rain hitting the roof created an eerie backdrop to the otherwise still atmosphere in the shop. Mr. Wilkes was hunched over his workbench, his hands moving with precision as he painted the delicate features of a doll's face. I was in the back room organizing some of the older dolls when I heard Mr. Gray's voice. He was standing by the counter, his usual cold smile on his face. "I'll take that one," he said, pointing to a large porcelain doll dressed in a pale blue gown. I nodded, though a chill ran down my spine. There was something different about this doll. It was larger than the others, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to glimmer unnaturally in the dim light. Its face was eerily serene, almost as if it was waiting for something. As Mr. Gray handed over money, he leaned toward me, his voice low and deliberate. "It will wake up soon," he whispered, his eyes glinting in a way that made my heart skip a beat. I stared at him, unsure how to respond. But before I could say anything, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The shop door creaked shut behind him, and I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the doll he had just purchased. Later that night, after Mr. Wilkes had retired to his quarters, I was left alone in the shop. The wind outside howled louder, and the sound of the storm seemed to drown out everything else. But then I heard it, laughter. It was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it grew louder, more distinct. The laughter wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from within the shop. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and turned toward the display area where the dolls were kept. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I saw it. The dolls, all of them, were moving. At first, it was just a large doll that Mr. Gray had purchased, but then more of the dolls began to stir, their porcelain limbs creaking and shifting in slow, deliberate movements. I gasped, my blood running cold. The large doll that Mr. Gray had bought was leading them, its head swiveling with a jerky, unnatural motion, as if it was awake, alive. The others followed, their movements synchronized like a strange, twisted dance. And then I saw it. The dolls were no longer just dolls. Their faces, once blank and expressionless, were contorted into grotesque masks of pain and terror. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. But as I did, I felt a presence behind me, a cold, oppressive presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned around, and there he was, Mr. Wilkes. But something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes empty. "Do you see it, Clara?" he asked, his voice distant, as though it wasn't truly him speaking. "The souls are waking up." Before I could respond, the dolls advanced, their eyes locked on me with an unnatural hunger. I could hear their whispers, fragments of voices, the trapped souls of those who had been trapped in the porcelain bodies over the years. They were all victims of Mr. Wilkes' obsession, their souls stolen to give life to his creations. I screamed, turning to run, but the dolls surrounded me. The large doll, the one Mr. Gray had purchased, reached out with a cold, stiff hand and grabbed my wrist. Its fingers dug into my skin like claws. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice a blend of children's cries and tortured souls. I yanked my arm free, stumbling back, desperate to find a way out. My breath was ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. The dolls were closing in, their eyes gleaming with malevolent glee. But then, just as I thought I couldn't escape, there was a sudden flash of light. A violent, scorching heat filled the room. The dolls shrieked, their bodies beginning to melt, their faces warping into grotesque shapes as they dissolved into a mass of ash and smoke. I ran. I don't remember how, but somehow, I found my way out of the shop and into the pouring rain. My heart was still pounding in my ears as I looked back at the shop, only to see flames erupting from the windows. The fire spread quickly, consuming everything in its path. The next day, the fire had left nothing but charred ruins. There was no sign of Mr. Wilkes, no sign of any dolls. Except for one, it was a doll, a perfect replica of me. Its porcelain eyes were wide, unblinking, and as I stared into them, I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. It was as if the doll was alive, watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Wilkes had never truly disappeared, that he was still out there, somewhere, watching. Maybe he was waiting for me, too. It's hard put into words what happened that night, even now. My hands tremble as I type this, and my breath catches in my throat every time I close my eyes. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what I encountered in the Marlowe mansion, but I'll try my best to share it, hoping that someone, anyone, can explain what happened. Jason and I had always joked about doing paranormal investigations. We never took it too seriously. Sure, we had the usual creepy noises, the cold spots, and the occasional flickering light, but it was all just part of the atmosphere, all part of the show. We weren't exactly the believers type. But that night changed everything. We'd spent weeks researching the Marlowe mansion, poring over old newspapers, talking to locals who were too afraid to even look at the place. I didn't understand why no one had been brave enough to venture inside. The house, while dilapidated and decaying, still had a certain allure. Old brick walls, broken windows, and overgrown ivy creeping up the sides. All that history hidden behind layers of dust and cobwebs. We were both excited, maybe even a little too eager to explore. It was almost 4 a.m. when we set up our equipment in the grand hall. The silence was oppressive. Every footstep echoed across the vast room, amplifying the tension between us. Jason, as usual, tried to lighten the mood. "Feels like we're setting up for a horror movie, doesn't it?" He chuckled, but I could see the unease in his eyes. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling at the back of my mind, telling me something was wrong. The air felt heavier than usual. The candles flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. I shook it off, blaming the drafty mansion and our nerves. We were both feeling it, the weight of the history, the stories, and the palpable sense that we weren't truly alone. We walked deeper into mansion, our footsteps mingling with the odd creaks of the floorboards beneath us. As I checked the sound equipment in the hallway, Jason wandered off toward the staircase, leading up to the second floor. I could hear him mumbling something under his breath, probably dismissing his own fears the same way I was. Then I heard it. Footsteps. I froze, my heart jumping into my throat. At first, I thought it was Jason, but when I glanced back, he was still at the top of the stairs. The footsteps weren't coming from him. They were coming from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone, maybe a trespasser, or even a figment of our imagination brought to life by our fear. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty. Jason called down to me, asking if everything was okay. His voice echoed in the empty space, and I tried to reply, but my mouth went dry. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was suffocating. I checked the equipment quickly, trying to convince myself that my mind was just playing tricks. The static hum of the microphone seemed to grow louder, as though the room itself was alive with the energy of something unseen. And then the figure appeared. At first, I thought it was one of those tricks of the light, or perhaps a trick of the mind, a shadow stretched too far, a face hidden by the darkness. But no, he was real. The figure stood in the doorway, his presence so overpowering that I couldn't move. He wore a hooded cloak, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I could feel his eyes on me, cold, empty, and suffocating. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was enough to freeze me in place. I found my voice barely and whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. The only thing I could hear was a faint, almost imperceptible sound of his breathing, and even that seemed to be part of the thickening silence. I couldn't look away. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out as though I could somehow break the spell he cast over me. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath, white and misty in the air. The flickering candles went out, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching toward me like fingers reaching from the void. And then, Jason was gone. 1 second, he was there, standing on the stairs, and the next, he was nowhere. "Jason?" I called out, my voice cracking as panic surged through me. No response. I ran to the stairs, my heart racing. I didn't know if I was being irrational, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that something terrible had just happened. I called his name again, my voice echoing through the empty mansion. But there was no answer. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was Jason's voice, but it didn't sound like him. It was distant, muffled, and wrong. I could have slit your throat. The word sent a chill down my spine, and I froze. My heart was hammering in my chest. No, that wasn't Jason. That couldn't be him. The figure in the doorway was no longer just a figure. The air around me felt thick with something ancient, something malevolent. I felt like I was suffocating. The shadows in the room seemed to close in, and the low growl of the wind outside sounded more like whispers now. Whispers of things that didn't belong to this world. I ran, instinct taking over, my feet moving without thought. I rushed to the grand hall, toward the door, desperate to escape. The mansion was alive with an energy I couldn't explain. The cold wind slammed against the windows, rattling the glass as if the house itself was trying to keep me inside. But then, the door slammed shut. I was trapped. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air thickening as though the house itself was feeding on my fear. My breath came in shallow gasps as I looked around for a way out. And that's when I saw him again. The figure. He was no longer standing in the doorway. He was right in front of me, close enough for me to feel the unnatural cold emanating from his body. But this time, his eyes weren't empty. They were Jason's eyes. Hollow, unblinking, but unmistakably Jason's. "Run," he whispered, and his voice was not his own. I ran. Somehow, I found my way to the back door and pushed it open, stumbling into the night air. The mansion stood behind me, silent and foreboding. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my legs shaking, my heart still racing. By the time the authorities arrived, there was no trace of Jason. The mansion was empty, silent, as though nothing had ever happened. My podcast episode, my last episode, was released as a confession, a desperate cry for help that no one could answer. I don't know what happened to Jason. I don't know what I encountered in that house. But I do know one thing. I was not alone that night. And whatever I saw, whatever it was, is still out there, watching, waiting. I can still hear it, sometimes, late at night. The footsteps, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. It never really stops.